Imagine you're on a date. It's a beautiful evening in the hills of Florence. Candlelit dinners, rolling vineyards, romance in the air. You drive to a secluded spot under the stars, just you and someone you care about. You think you're alone, but you're not. Someone's watching from the darkness, and in the next few minutes you'll both be dead. Your bodies mutilated. Your lives stolen by a killer who'll vanish like smoke. This isn't a horror movie. This actually happened 16 times. And the monster who did it, he was never caught. Look, I've covered a lot of serial killers on this channel, but the Monster of Florence case is different. It's not just about the body count or the brutality, though believe me, both are horrifying. It's about how an entire investigation collapsed under the weight of corruption, paranoia, and sheer incompetence. It's about innocent people being thrown in prison while the real killer walked free. And it's about a predator who terrorized one of the most beautiful cities in the world for 17 years before simply stopping. Between 1968 and 1985, 8 young couples were murdered in the countryside around Florence. We're talking about 16 people who went out for a romantic evening and never came home. The killer had a signature, a .22 Beretta pistol, precise shots, and then, here's where it gets truly disturbing, he would mutilate the female victims with what investigators described as surgical precision. He took trophies, he kept them, and here's the part that'll keep you up at night. Despite one of the longest investigations in Italian history, despite multiple arrests and sensational trials, nobody really knows who the Monster of Florence was. The case is officially unsolved, so buckle up, this story gets dark. Let's go back to August 21st, 1968, a cemetery near Lastra a Signa, just outside Florence. 2 bodies are discovered in a car, Barbara Loci, 32, and her lover Antonio Lobianco, 29. Both shot dead. And here's the heartbreaking part. Barbara's 6-year-old son was in the back seat the whole time. He survived, but can you imagine what that child witnessed? At first, investigators thought this was simple. Barbara was married, but she was with another man. Obviously, her jealous husband did it, right? They arrested Stefano Mele, Barbara's husband, and within hours, he confessed. Case closed. Except Stefano's confession was all over the place. First he said he did it alone. Then he said his brother-in-law helped. Then he named some friends. Then he changed his story again. The guy was clearly either lying or completely unreliable, but the police didn't care. They had their confession, and Stefano went to prison. Life in Florence went back to normal. For 6 years, everything was quiet. Everyone forgot about that tragic night in 1968. But someone hadn't forgotten. Someone was out there, waiting. September 14th, 1974. Another couple, another car, another murder scene. This time it's Pasquale Gentilcore and Stefania Pettini, young lovers parked in Borgo San Lorenzo. Same .22 caliber weapon. But this time, the killer did something he hadn't done before, or at least not this severely. Stefania's body was horrifically mutilated. Parts of her body were cut away with disturbing precision. When ballistics came back, investigators realized they had a massive problem. The bullets matched the 1968 murders, the exact same gun. But wait, Stefano Mele was still in prison. He couldn't have done this, which meant either Stefano had an accomplice who was still out there, or they'd locked up an innocent man while the real monster continued hunting. The police reopened the investigation, but they had nothing. No witnesses, no evidence, no leads. Just fear spreading through Florence like wildfire. Jump ahead to 1981. Giovanni Foghi and Carmela Di Nuccio. Same pattern, same weapon. Carmela's body mutilated. Then 1982, Paolo Mainardi and Antonella Migliorini. This time, the killer dragged Antonella's body 30 feet from the car before mutilating her. He was taking his time now, becoming more confident, more brazen. The Italian press gave him a name, Il Mostro di Firenze, the Monster of Florence. And young couples in Tuscany stopped going to the countryside at night. The romantic hills where people used to stargaze and fall in love had become hunting grounds. By now, the monster had a rhythm. He'd strike, disappear for months or even years, then emerge again to claim more victims. Each time, investigators found themselves chasing shadows. September 1983 brought something unexpected. The monster struck again, but this time his victims were Horst Meyer and Uwe Jens Rusch, two German men. Now, here's what's fascinating from a psychological standpoint. The killer shot them both, but he didn't mutilate the bodies. In the darkness, he'd made a mistake. He thought he was attacking a heterosexual couple, but when he realized both victims were male, he just left. No mutilation, no trophy taking. This told investigators something crucial. The monster wasn't just killing randomly. He had a specific ritual, a specific fantasy that required female victims. This was about something deeper than just murder. This was about fulfilling some twisted need in his mind. But the nightmare wasn't over. In 1984, Pia Rontini and Claudio Stefanacci were camping in a tent near Vicchio. The killer slashed through the tent, shot them both at point-blank range, and then mutilated Pia's body with increasing savagery. It was like watching someone perfect their sick craft. Later that year, the monster struck for what would be the final time. Jean-Michel Crevechvili and Nadine Moriot, a young French couple, were camping near San Casciano. Same pattern, same horror. Nadine's body was mutilated, and part of her breast was removed. Before we get into the absolute chaos that was this investigation, and trust me, it gets wild, hit that subscribe button if you're not already part of this community. We dive deep into cases like this every week, and I need you here for the next one because we're covering another case that'll blow your mind. Plus, it helps the algorithm actually show these videos to people who want to see them. Alright, let's get back to Florence because this is where things go completely off the rails. 3 months after that last murder, investigators received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a piece of Nadine's breast, the trophy the killer had taken, along with a taunting message. The monster was playing games now, showing off his work. Then, suddenly, the murders stopped. No more killings. Nothing. Was the monster dead? In prison for something else? Had he moved away? Nobody knew. But the investigation? Oh, it was just getting started. And this is where the story goes from tragic to absolutely insane. Lead investigator Ruggero Perugini became convinced, and I mean absolutely obsessed with this idea, that the murders were connected to a satanic cult. He believed wealthy, powerful people in Florence were commissioning these killings for occult rituals. They needed fresh body parts for their ceremonies, so they hired someone to get them. Now, was there any actual evidence for this? None. But that didn't stop the investigation from spiraling into full-blown conspiracy theory territory. In 1993, police arrested Pietro Pacciani, a local farmer with a seriously dark past. Back in 1951, Pacciani had murdered a man he caught sleeping with his fiancée. He'd also been accused of sexually abusing his own daughters. Was he a good person? Absolutely not. But was he the Monster of Florence? That's where things get murky. Pacciani's trial was a circus. The prosecution threw everything at him: circumstantial evidence, character attacks, dubious witness testimony. In 1994, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Florence celebrated. The monster was finally caught. Except, 2 years later, the conviction was overturned. There just wasn't enough solid evidence. Pacciani walked free and the investigation shifted to his alleged accomplices, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti. They were convicted in 1997, but many legal experts believe those convictions were based on coerced confessions and weak evidence. Pietro Pacciani died in 1998 under mysterious circumstances, right before he was supposed to be retried. Some people think he was murdered to keep him quiet. Others think it was just coincidence. Either way, he took whatever he knew to his grave. Here's where the story takes another bizarre turn. In 2000, American crime novelist Douglas Preston moved to Florence with his family. He'd heard about the monster case and got curious. He started researching it with Mario Spezzi, an Italian journalist who'd been covering the murders since day one. Preston and Spezzi started asking uncomfortable questions. They challenged the satanic cult theory. They pointed out all the holes in the official investigation. They suggested that maybe, just maybe, the wrong people were in prison. And you know what happened? The Italian authorities turned on them. In 2006, Mario Spezzi was arrested and accused of being involved in the murders. Can you believe that? A journalist who'd been investigating the case for decades suddenly became a suspect. Douglas Preston was interrogated and eventually had to flee Italy. The charges against Spezzi were eventually dropped, but the message was clear. Don't question the official narrative. Preston and Spezzi later wrote a book called The Monster of Florence, exposing all the dysfunction and corruption they'd uncovered. It's a wild read if you're interested in diving deeper. So, after all this, after 17 years of murders, decades of investigation, multiple arrests, and endless theories, who was the Monster of Florence? Honestly, we don't know. And that's the most terrifying answer. Some people still believe it was Pietro Pacciani, maybe working with accomplices. His violent history definitely fits, and he lived near some of the crime scenes. But the evidence just isn't there. Others point back to that first murder in 1968. Maybe someone in Stefano Mele's circle, a friend, a relative, got hold of that .22 Beretta and kept killing for years. Some investigators suspected a man named Salvatore Vinci, who was connected to Barbara Locci from that first murder. But again, nothing concrete. There's also the possibility that the monster was someone completely unknown to investigators. A lone wolf who planned meticulously, struck when conditions were perfect, and then blended back into normal society. The long gaps between murders suggest someone with incredible self-control. Someone who could suppress his urges for months or years at a time. That's not common, but it happens. The fact that the murders stopped in 1985 is significant. Either the killer died, got arrested for something else, moved away, or, and this is a disturbing thought, maybe he just satisfied whatever sick need was driving him and stopped. From a psychological perspective, the Monster of Florence fits the profile of an organized serial killer almost perfectly. These weren't crimes of opportunity. They were planned. The killer brought his weapon, chose isolated locations, and had escape routes figured out. The long, cooling-off periods between murders show someone who could function in normal society. He probably had a job, maybe a family. He was hiding in plain sight. The targeting of couples is especially revealing. This wasn't random. The killer was specifically going after young people in love, in intimate moments. That speaks to deep sexual inadequacy or rage toward romantic relationships. Maybe he was someone who felt excluded from love, who watched from the shadows while others experienced what he couldn't have. So he destroyed what he couldn't possess. And those mutilations? They got progressively worse with each victim. That's textbook escalation. The killer was refining his fantasy, becoming bolder, taking more time with his victims. He was perfecting his ritual. Remember that mistake with the German tourists? When he realized they were both male, he didn't complete his ritual. That tells us the female victims weren't just targets. They were essential to his fantasy. He needed them to act out whatever dark scenario had been playing in his mind, possibly for years before that first murder. Today, the Monster of Florence case remains one of Italy's greatest mysteries. Those beautiful Tuscan hills where young lovers used to watch the stars now carry the weight of 16 names. 16 people who never made it home that night. The investigation was a disaster, riddled with tunnel vision, corruption, and wild conspiracy theories. Innocent people may have been convicted while the real killer slipped away. If he's still alive today, he'd be in his 70s or 80s, living quietly with his terrible secrets. But somewhere, someone knows the truth. Maybe it's the killer himself, replaying those nights in his mind. Maybe it's someone who suspected a family member or friend but stayed silent. Maybe it's buried in police files that'll never see the light of day. The Monster of Florence reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying truth is uncertainty. Not knowing is its own kind of horror. And in the hills of Florence, that horror lingers still.